Hello everyone, this is County Historian Larry Tippin. We've been doing a series that we call Tiny Towns and Vanishing Villages of Putnam County. In this session, we're going to talk about Blakesburg, Cairo, and Fincastle, three communities so close to each other and so related. We're going to talk about all three of those. Anytime in this presentation, we'll be looking at maps, newspapers, and so forth. And if I get ahead of you, you'd like to pause and read, you can hit the pause button. Or if I've already gone ahead of you, you can left click and grab the little button and pull it back and go to the previous slide. Let's talk first about Blakesburg. Some of this information came from a pamphlet type publication that Marion Borden gave to the County Historical Society in 1972. There's also a Blakesburg and Fincastle book written by Malcolm Rumbine, very nice book, and it's for sale at the County Museum gift shop, and then also many local residents who contributed to this and other source documents. Let's start by looking at the 1879 Atlas of Putnam County. Has a map in the Russell and Franklin Township area. We see Fincastle, west at Blakesburg, and then up you go to Cairo. Continue north at Cairo, you go to Swanksville, which we covered in a different session. We're going to talk about this area today. And I also want to point out this right here. This was one of the original, what we call tavern roads, which connected the tavern/inns of the community, and also was used to carry the mail from one place to the next. So you had a post office in Bainbridge and a post office in Blakesburg, also in Carpentersville. This is the road that's used to carry the mail and often used the tavern road, or sometimes called the stagecoach road. Interestingly, this is south of Fincastle on the current 231, those State Road 43 at that time, and so forth. As it goes toward Bainbridge to the east, it crosses Ram Creek 18 times, mostly staying near and on Ram Creek. Apparently, it's much easier to ford the stream as it is to clear the dense forest at the time to create a roadway. But then it continued west to Blakesburg, and this is south of Ram Creek. This road up here is the current Fincastle to Blakesburg Road. But the first road, the earlier road, was south of Ram Creek, stayed close to Ram Creek. That was the early tavern road and the early stagecoach road. I've been studying a lot on these roads. And you can see just a little bit south and east of Blakesburg, near Ram Creek, where one of these roads was clearly graded. It's clearly been graded. The old stagecoach road. And since then, of course, it's been abandoned, and then trees have grown up. If you look close on this, since this was a lava area, it started burying people. Here's Jane Connor, and then an infant Moss buried here, and I think there's several other stones in this area, in this cemetery as well. We generally call this cemetery the Connor Moss because these two burials are old Blakesburg, but it's a little bit south and east of the Blakesburg Cemetery on the Tavern Road. Let's talk about John Foster, the eldest son of Daniel Foster, Mavelis Eccles, came to America as an aide to his older brother, who was a Hessian soldier, hired by the English to fight the colonists. So they were on the other side, the English side. And he was with the British and Hessian encampment when Washington crossed the Delaware into Trenton, New Jersey on Christmas Eve, 1776. Daniel Foster then elected to join the Continental Forces, and he fought on our side. At the end of the Revolutionary War, then he settled in Campbell County, Virginia, where he married Mavelis Eccles. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. I apologize. Daniel Foster is buried at Family Cemetery south of Centerville, Indiana. The inscription on the stone reads, Daniel Foster, M.D., Soldiers of the Revolution, died in 1849, years of 87. We're not sure about his medical training, and Marion Borden, in her little publication, speculated about that also. So apparently at some point in time he had become a doctor. John Foster, the eldest of the 10 children of Daniel, married Elizabeth Landis, daughter of Samuel Landis, in 1804. 3 years later, they moved to the free state of Ohio, where he continued to live for about 15 years. Then he and others came to Indiana to explore the newly settled, newly opened area in Indiana, went to Terre Haute, then up the Wabash and Raccoon Creek, continued on to Ram Creek, where he planted some peach seeds or grafts that he had with him, returned to Ohio, convinced his wife to move to Indiana. First entered land in 1821, one of the early settlers there. This is his land patent for that entry. Land patent then were the first transfer of land from the federal government to the early settlers. This was the form of revenue, the only form of revenue, really, for the federal government in the early days when they sold the federal land, usually $1 an acre, $1.25, $1.50 at various times. John Foster then cleared a place for his orchard, delighted to see that some of the peach seedlings that he had planted earlier were thriving. He planted more. And then 1821, erected a cabin, which believed to be the first cabin along Ram Creek in that area. Few neighbors except for the locals that were already there before us. We have documentation of several different sources. We had a conversation with an old squaw who came to Foster's house, probably came to his mill, and while they were grinding the corn at the mill, had this conversation with Foster. Very interesting, very neat. And then he had other inches of land. By 1831, it entered almost 700 acres. 1832, his oldest son, Christian Foster, opened the first tan yard in the area. In 1826, John Foster erected a sawmill run by water power, Ram Creek. And they also had a grist mill. The nearest grist mill at that time was said to be at Vincennes, about 100 miles southwest. There was also, about that time, or soon after, a mill in Swanksville, which was a few miles north of Blakesburg. Again, we covered Swanksville, prominent but forgotten early community, in a different session. Here's the actual, believed to be the actual mill wheel from Foster's Mill. It's courtesy of Laura Scott, her brother James, and Janet Oliver, proudly standing at the mill wheel. Then one of the earliest settlers then of Blakesburg was James Seacrest. In an early acres, 80 acres in the Blakesburg area, believed to build for a store or trading post, and it became Blakesburg first postmaster in 1828, which was not yet platted. And then later postmasters then include these people, and the post office discontinued in 1839. This is one of the earliest post offices, possibly the second post office in the county after Greencastle. Now, there's a publication called Postmasters 1832 to 1971, which is a handwritten journal kept by the Postmaster General of the postmasters and the appointment of post offices. But there's also one prior to that, which is really going to have to only can go view at the National Archives. Tony and I went to Atlanta to view this one, which shows the Blakesburg Post Office in Putnam, Indiana. James Seacrest was appointed postmaster May 26, 1828. Received $300. That included his expenses for operating the post office. Since the post office was in his store, then he was able to make probably a decent profit. In 1828, James Blake entered 80 acres, section 24, adjacent to Foster's land. Blake was born in Adams County, Pennsylvania, 1791, served in the War of 1812. Settled in Indianapolis in 1821, influenced by the abundance of ginseng, they called sang. They established a drying plant for the ginseng, or ginseng plant, or sang mill, if you will, at Blakesburg, a second in Indianapolis, yet a third in Delphi, north of Lafayette. Farmers bought the sang to Nicholas McCarty's branch store in Indianapolis, where he collected it, shipped to Madison and Cincinnati on his way to China. Then James Blake platted Blakesburg, 2 words, with an H at the end of it, in 1830, sections 24 and 25, as noted in the plat books in the county recorder's office, the Putnam County Courthouse. James Blake died Thanksgiving Day, 1870. Then he's memorialized by honor of Blake Street, Indianapolis, was named after James Blake. His brother Jesse Blake came to the Blakesburg area and entered 80-acre tract in 1830, another in 1831. For a number of years, he operated a store at Blakesburg. This is a journal from the store at Blakesburg. We still have it. It's made its rounds. It was at DePaul University for a while. The Historical Society had it for a while. And now it's at the Putnam County Public Library, the original. We have the original journal from Blake's store. And his system was he would put down the date and then what person bought, almost always on credit, of course, but where they lived, because he's going to track them down to get his money or his exchange of goods, usually, for these various people. And then in the back, later in the book, he has where he collected. This is the most interesting article, that book. September 1st, 1830, General Jackson of Washington City bought a plug of tobacco, which was never paid for, by the way. Now, General Jackson, we're almost sure this is President Jackson, 7th President of the United States, served from 1829 to 1837, came through then Blakesburg. The main east-west road at that time, this was before railroads, you went from, say, Danville to Rockville, you went through Blakesburg. You did not go through the Bainbridge area where we have now the ocean-to-ocean highway, but you went through Blakesburg. That was the east-west road at the time. And we're certain this was General Jackson. Interesting article, 1956. If you want to pause and read the whole thing, feel free to do so. Or you can go to the Hoosier State Chronicles, and which you can easily do a search for Hoosier State Chronicles and whatever search engine you like to use, and then look at the various newspapers. This is one from 1956, where the Historical Society is meeting at the Old Trail Inn, where they commonly met. And Bill Boatwright, who was the president at the time, he and his wife Florence were influential members of the Historical Society in the 50s, 60s, and so forth. They had a program presented by Raymond Grider, who had at that time in his possession Jesse Blake's ledger book, which we have now at the library. Noted too, Russellville Township was part of Clinton at one time. That was split off in Russell Township. And they talked about the book and the various people and so forth, and how it was at the Department of Archives at that time. Much discussion was enjoyed, noted that Lincoln had stayed at the end of Blakesburg. Of course he did. If Lincoln had stayed at every place that he had credited staying, he would have lived about 6 or 7 lifetimes. But let's say he did. In 1832, John Foster built a large brick home, which is a 2-story dwelling with an attic where he kept beehives. This entering observation noted by Marion Borden in her little publication were stains from the dropping of honey caused wild tales of murder where people thought somebody had been murdered and blood was dripping down the side of the building. But Marion Borden noted her mother, who was a great-granddaughter of Foster, said that there was no truth to tell, and that was the honey, not blood. This is the stone, James Foster, and the Blakesburg, John Foster, and his wife Elizabeth, in the Blakesburg Cemetery. And on the back side of it, it's very interesting. It's the story of his life. We recently restored this cemetery. This is obscured by 100 years of black algae. We cleaned it. We could read this. Said John Foster built his first cabin on the creek, on Ram Creek, the fall of 1821. Said at the prime of his life, he was 6'1", weighed over 200 pounds. He was an uncompromising enemy of slavery. He died as he lived, a firm, reverent believer, universal salvation of all mankind. His daughter Lydia married John Gilliams. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. The old burial ground was on their land. It's very interesting. The cemetery is still there, called Blakesburg Cemetery. Still burying people today in the new part. And then also nearby was his son Jacob, who died in 1826. 1826. It's the oldest legible tombstone that I have personally read. I've read a lot of them in the county, so not all of them, but most of them. This is the oldest still legible, 1826, when your old son died there at Blakesburg. Also buried there, Revolutionary War soldier William McGoy, or possibly McGay. This is a neat photo contributed by Sarah Bridges. It's kind of a side view here of this one, which was the old inn of Blakesburg. And then it was noted that it had been 3 stories at one time. This looks like 2-story. And it had a cellar, so maybe the cellar was the 3rd floor. I don't know the whole story to it. But this is a very nice photo of the home, which later became the inn at Blakesburg. It's like the Bridges family. Charles Bowles Bridges came from Montgomery County, Kentucky, near Mount Sterling, to Indiana in 1834. First settled near Blakesburg. Then he bought the farm of James Seacrest, the 160 acres near Blakesburg. Seacrest being had the first store and first postmaster then at Blakesburg. And there's a very nice biographical sketch of Charles Bowles Bridges on page 723 of Week's History of Putnam County of 1910. It said he had 5 sons, 4 daughters. The oldest, Robert, built the large brick house north of Fincastle, which is still standing, and other sons built large wood frame homes north of Fincastle, which are also still standing. 1 or 2 of those have been recently remodeled. And Charles and Robert Bridges operated stores in both Fincastle and Cairo. Cairo was about 1.5 miles northwest of Fincastle, or due north of Blakesburg, where you see a lot of the bridges, a school, which I believe was a hall school. I may be wrong. Apologize if I'm wrong. But this is about 1.5 miles west of 231, what we call Tollgate Road, which is 1100 north. And this is 850 east. Again, this is 1879, Atlas, Putnam County. Cairo is significant had a post office from 1867 to 1877. These are the postmasters at Cairo Post Office, kept at the store of Bridges, probably. In 1852, Bridges was in the store business of Fincastle and owned over 4,000 acres of land. About this time, he heard of a cook stove they were using in Ohio, so he sent there and brought one, which was the first in the neighborhood, which proved a great advantage over an open fireplace, for which he paid $37. And then Fincastle had a post office for a long period of time. Started in 1847, discontinued for a period of time, started again in 1877. And then if you want to pause and read the postmasters and the date of appointment at the time, you can do so. Mostly the Bridges, Fosters, Griders. The post office discontinued in 1905, just after they started rural-free delivery. So now the mail is going to be delivered to your post office, to your post box, as opposed to having to go to the post office. So they discontinued a lot of the small post offices at that time. And this was the post office, photo of the post office, the boxes that were in the various stores at the Fincastle, we believe, contributed by Laura Scott. In 1871, an impressive brick church was constructed at Fincastle by the Universalists, which church Charles Robert Bridges were strong supporters, contributed significant money to get that church built. Then Charles Bowles Bridges gave the church a Needham & Sons organ, which cost $440 in 1871. It's a vast, large amount of money. Then Robert and his descendants were longtime members of that church. This is the pulpit from the church. This is the original pulpit. Very, very, very nice condition. Sarah Bridges has it. She very generously donated a photo of it and let us look at it. It still has some inscriptions scratched into the other side of it. Very neat. We believe this was the pulpit at the church in Fincastle. And then some newspaper stories. This is one from 1881. Again, you can pause and read anytime you want. From Hathaway's Mill, where a great many people had gone different things. Look at some of the names, Gilliams, Sutherlands, and so forth. And also, it's 1881. News from Possum Trot in 1896, where you see some of those same names. The Clay Bridges, Crodians, and then talk about Ramp Creek. Ramp Creek, by the way, was named for the ramp, which is a vegetation similar to an onion or a leek that grew along Ramp Creek. And here they call us about the Postmaster Foster and his family visiting the Strip Sunday, whatever that means. Also, Pine Ridge, where we see some of the same families, Underwoods, and so forth, and so on. In 1894, written by the correspondent Old Maid, Shoeys, so forth. And then if you don't like Pine Ridge, you could go to East Pine Ridge and read the news from there. Simon Hinkle. Most of these people are buried at the Hartman Cemetery, which is a few miles south and east of Fincastle. So I'm certain all these communities that went by different names were at or near the Fincastle, Blakesburg, Cairo area, or a little bit southeast of there. I hope you've enjoyed some of the early history of these communities. You can come back at a future time. We're going to talk about some more.